The moment is finally here. Next 15 is out, and you can actually start upgrading your projects to use Next 15 if you're currently on Next 14 or something lower, which I hope you're not. So let's kind of go through these. I haven't actually started a Next 15 project yet. So this is, again, I'm just reading the docs for you guys. If you guys are just like listening to this as you're driving to work, or you just want to hear my opinion. So the first thing to point out, it looks like they provided a code mod tool that you can run as a CLI command to basically upgrade your Next 14 project to Next 15. Obviously, I haven't tried this. I haven't had time to, but let me know in the comments if you tried this and how well it works. There are two main breaking changes that are associated with the Next 15 upgrade. And I'm assuming the code mod is going to help you migrate to those changes. It looks like it says, with every major Next.js release, we help automate upgrading breaking changes with this code mod thing. So it probably just goes through your code and just like changes some stuff. So the first breaking change is we have Async Request APIs. You read through this, basically it's saying that wherever you were previously trying to access headers, cookies, params, search params, you now need to treat them as asynchronous functions. That's a pretty big change, right? This could potentially break a lot of code and require you to come through here and add a wait to everything and then make the component that is using cookies to be asynchronous, okay? Again, the code mod tool should help with this, and maybe I'll try running the code mod tool in another video. But so that's the change. Now, I don't really understand the reason for it, so let's read through this. In traditional server-side rendering, the server waits for a request before rendering any content. However, not all components depend on request-specific data, so it's unnecessary to wait for the request to render them. Ideally, the server would prepare as much as possible before a request arrives. Now, honestly, I'm not really sure what this means. I'm guessing there is some fine-tuning in terms of performance that enables them to make the request send back a response faster if they know when components can await for things and not need to like wait for cookies or need to wait for headers. That's my assumption, and that's kind of like what it seems like it reads out. But again, I'm just doing a really surface level overview of these changes. I'm the least informed YouTuber out here. Anyway, let's talk about caching semantics. I think this is also a really important one. This is a breaking change. And the main change here is in Next 14, a lot of things like components and API endpoints that might do a GET request, by default, those cached everything. So like if you just make a simple GET endpoint, GET API endpoint that basically returns math.random, Next is going to cache. And so like you'll never get a new random value as you're making requests to that endpoint, which to me and a lot of other people, I think they complained a lot and it was just very confusing as like, why is this GET request not returning fresh data? It should. And so you had to basically go and specify manually that this is a dynamic endpoint. Okay, so one of the changes is that now by default, it's not being cached, which is great. I like that. I don't think we should cache by default. I think a lot of stuff should be opt into caching. You should tune in the performance when you feel like you need to do it and not just have everything cached. So I think this is a really good change and I'm excited for this. But this could potentially break your app a little bit if you were depending on the caching defaults. But you can opt back into the caching if you want to. You read through this docs and they'll tell you. I'm not going to read through all this. This is another good one. Client router cache no longer caches page components by default. And I think I've actually made a video about this, which is kind of confusing, where if you load up a page, it's going to cache the page into the client side router. And then if you were to click on a link, and then you go back and click on another link that takes you back to the page you're just on, it's going to show you the old stale page, even though like that page should be fetching data fresh every time. And I think internally that had like a 30-second timer on it. I don't think I'm explaining this well, but basically in one of my apps I built, I had like navigation, like I had side navigation, and every link took you to a different view of data. And so you click on one link and it would load the data. You click on another one. And then if within 30 seconds you were to try to click back on docs, it wouldn't refresh all the data because this is all stored in the client side router, which was actually very, very annoying because like it forced me to add effects and like call router.refresh when the component mounted. So like it could fetch the new data. I think they've turned that off because I made a couple of videos about that. It's just so frustrating how like, okay, I want data to be fresh because I'm building like applications with highly dynamic data. And now it seems like that's the default. Now I will state that using the back and forward navigation buttons in your browser, it's still going to restore from the cache. But I think that's just kind of how the browser works to begin with. So there's not really a good way you can kind of click the back button and force it to refresh unless you have like maybe effects that cause a refresh manually. And there's some other changes here that I'm not going to read for you all because I know you guys are capable of reading docs. You can do this, guys. Load up the docs, spend 30 minutes and read through them. All right, the React 19 changes. Honestly, I've been kind of mentally checked out on React, on Next, and these updates and the release candidates and the new features they're shipping. I don't really know. I don't care. So I'm going to skip this section. I'm guessing there's cool stuff that they're shipping. But at this point, let's just keep going. The React compiler, this is actually something that's pretty cool, and this has been talked about already in the past. The main takeaway is that they're trying to build a compiler that's going to look over your components, and instead of you having to write use memo or use callback on things, like the compiler is just going to make the code clean and easier to write. Because to be honest, this is one thing that I think is like the worst developer experience out of all the frameworks that are out there. Like use memo, use effect, and use callback. They're very hard to master and they're very convoluted. And sometimes you'll define a function in a component and you want to pass that down into a hook. But if you do that, every render cycle, it recreates that function reference and it thinks that it needs to re-render everything. And so you have to wrap it in a use callback so that it doesn't keep doing that infinite loop chain. And I think if the React compiler can just get rid of some of that garbage that's built in React, that's a win. That's a big win in my opinion. It seems like React compiler is currently only available as a Babel plugin. So Babel sucks. Babel is slow. It's just like it eats up your CPU. So I guess I'm going to mentally check out on the compiler until they say it's compatible with like anything better than Babel, right? Give me ES build. Give me whatever Rust thing, turbo pack thing they're working on. All right, let's move on. Hydration error improvements. So error messages in Next 14 were pretty rough, right? Sometimes you just have an error that's thrown out. You just sat there and like looked at it and you're like, I don't know what is causing this hydration error. But I guess now what it tells you is that it gives you a lot more information about what's going on, which is great. This is really good information. So before you get like an error message that looks like this, you might try to grab it, throw it in the ChatGPT, throw it in the cursor. It would respond with good luck and that's it. And now we have nicer error messages. Like, look how detailed this is. This error message is nicer. It kind of gives you a breakdown of what some common things that could cause this issue. And then it also like highlights the difference, I guess. But basically a hydration error is like when you do a server-side render pass, if it creates a snapshot of your page, and then when it gets to the client and it does that client pass through, if there's like a difference between how those pages look, you'll get a hydration error like this. And that's typically caused with using like date.now or math.randoms, or if you have like weird nesting of tags. But anyway, that's a win. I mean, improvements in error text is always a win. All right, Turbo Pack Dev. We are happy to announce that Next Dev Turbo is now stable and ready to speed up your development experience. So that's a good win. Prior, Next.js had some performance issues running locally, like the dev server, you could just feel it's going slow. You'll save a file and it takes like seconds for the page to refresh. I'm guessing using Turbo Pack now can really speed that up. And it looks like they gave you a breakdown here. 76 faster local server startup. That's nice. 96 faster code updates with fast refresh. This is nice. Because like I said, I've seen Next.js just start slowing down. And I have like a M3 Mac, 12 core, 16 gig of memory. And it's like, I'm saving a file and it's just like taking forever to refresh on my browser. So any improvements on that, that's awesome. So I'm happy about that. What's this? 45% faster initial route compile without caching. TurboPack does not have a disk caching yet. I'm not smart enough to understand what that means, so let's just move on. Static route indicator. So this one, it looks like they're giving you a component that adds it to your page to know if you're on a static route or not. Let's learn more about that because I don't know what this is. All right, let me just read this paragraph like I'm reading my kids a child story. Next.js displays a static indicator in the bottom corner of the screen that signals if a route will be pre-rendered at build time. This makes it easier to understand whether a route is static or dynamic, and for you to identify if a route opts out of a static rendering. So this is pretty good. I think previously you'd have to do like a next run build, and that's how you know if like a route was opted in to be static or dynamic. And having this displayed on your pages by default, like, simplifies that process, because that really screws you up when you like think everything's good and you push it to production. You realize that the pages you just pushed, they're all like statically built. And so like your users hit your pages and you're not seeing the data change. Okay, so having this displayed as a little like built-in widget Pretty cool, I guess. Let's move on to this one. Executing code after a response with unstable after experimental. Okay, so this one, I think I've heard about this one before. So often when you make a request to an endpoint, you think it's just a simple, like, here's the request, fetch some data from the database, and then send a response back, right? That's typically how it works, but sometimes you want to do some other things. Like in this case, they're saying like logging is a good example. Let's say you also want to like send off a log event to your logging system. Maybe you're using Sentry or using some type of third-party logging service, and on a certain layout or endpoint, you just want to log when people make those requests. But you don't want that log to block your render because it could take some time to send that log event off, okay? Especially if you're like deployed to a serverless environment, the Lambda needs to know when stuff is done. And so what this allows you to do is you can basically wrap your code with this after function, and then you can run some code after the response is already like being sent back to the user. So which is pretty cool. It just allows you to run like a secondary thing in the background and not block the components or the endpoints from rendering. So again, it's unstable, so I don't know if I'll be playing with that yet, but it's pretty interesting. All right, instrumentation.js. Honestly, this is the first time hearing about this file, but basically, from what I understand, is that there's a file you can put in Next.js where you can do some stuff when your application, I guess, first mounts. So it looks like down here, they give you this ability to basically, if any request happens to error out, you can just do some type of logic. And so their example is you could send off a Sentry event. They also have this export async function register. And this says initialize your favorite observability provider SDK. So actually, I do think I remember reading about this instrument.js file. Basically, if you're hosting Next.js on a VPS, one thing that's very hard to do is like, I just want to spin up a WebSocket server. And now I think you can actually use this register function where you can run like this initial WebSocket initialization, and you could have like a running WebSocket server inside of your same Next.js application. It's like a bootstrap function that you can do things in. That's how I understand it, but correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. And again, if you're running this on Vercel or serverless or using SST to deploy this to AWS, definitely you probably can't do that. Let's move on. We have a new form component. This extends the HTML form element with prefetching, client-side navigation, and progressive enhancement. It is useful for forms that navigate to a new page, such as a search form that leads to a results page. So prefetching, when the form is in view, the layout and loading UI are prefetched, making navigation fast. So I'm guessing this thing is the URL that you want to go to and you click submit. And just the fact that this is in the DOM, it's going to prefetch that stuff. So like it's going to be super quick when it tries to actually do the search. Client-side navigation on submission, shared layouts and client-side state are preserved. So I'm guessing it just means that like you're not going to see like a full page refresh, right? You're just going to see like the things persist if they need to. Don't know if I explained that correctly. Progressive enhancement. If JavaScript hasn't loaded yet, the form still works via a full page navigation. So yeah, if you turn JavaScript off, it'll just work. So that might be pretty interesting. I might play around with that one and see how I can utilize it. Support for next.config.ts. Next.js now supports TypeScript next.config.ts file type and provides a next config type for autocomplete and type safe options. Honestly, I don't think this is that big of a deal. I have seen autocomplete work perfectly fine. Like, for example, you see all this autocomplete that's happening. I guess it's just more proper that now you can use TypeScript here instead of MJS and have to do this weird hack where they like import the type. Now it's more like first class citizen, next config, you just import it. So that's pretty cool. But again, nothing too groundbreaking there. Improvements for self-hosting. So if you like to self-host on a Docker image or like a VPS or something, I think before they were like overriding the cache control header with their own stuff, which wasn't really compatible with a lot of CDNs. I think they fixed that. And so now like you won't run into issues wherever you decide to deploy this, it'll just work with the CDN that you're using, hopefully. This one's a cool one too. So Sharp, I've seen this a lot when I try to deploy on a VPS, like you'll get an error. Yeah, I literally just saw this deploying an application. So like you'll get this error, Sharp is required to be installed in standalone mode, which is just one extra package you have to remember to install. But I guess what they're doing now is like, if you are using standalone, they automatically install it for you. And that's like, the Sharp library is used for the Next.js image component that does the image scaling and whatnot. So it's a more performant library for doing that stuff. So it's just nice that you don't have to worry about it. It just works. But overall, I mean, nothing to write home about. It's not that important. Let's see, enhanced security for server actions. Let's see, server actions are server-side functions that can be called from the client. They are defined by adding a use server directive at the top of the file and exporting an async function. Even if a server action utility function is not imported elsewhere in your code, it is still a publicly accessible HTTP endpoint. While this behavior is technically correct, it can lead to unintentional exposure of such functions. To improve security, we have introduced the following enhancements. Dead code elimination. Unused server actions won't have their IDs exposed to the client-side JavaScript bundle, reducing bundle size and improving performance. So I'm guessing if you had a action that you never actually called it anywhere in your code base, this would no longer be accessible. Like no one can know what the ID is, and they couldn't just guess what your server action would be, which is nice. So secure action IDs. Next.js now creates unguessable, non-deterministic IDs to allow the client to reference and call the server action. These IDs are periodically recalculated between builds for enhanced security. So I think those go hand in hand. Basically, you have an actions file. When you put use server at the top of it, every single exported function becomes publicly accessible. But you can't guess the IDs anymore. They're just non-guessable, probably just UIDs or something. And then also if you have a function that's just not used, I guess somehow it just tree shakes that and gets rid of it. Reduces the bundle size and improves the performance. And again, it's an unguessable ID. So even if this was publicly exposed still, like no one can guess it. You should still treat server actions as public HTTP endpoints. Learn about securing server actions, okay? I'm getting tired of reading. How many more things do we have? Okay, we got like 3 more. Thank God. All right, optimizing bundling of external packages. Stable. Bundling external packages can now improve the cold start performance of your application. In the app router, external packages are bundled by default. You can opt out specific packages using the new server external packages config option. Okay, so yeah, I guess if you just don't want an external thing bundled, which I guess I don't really understand why you wouldn't, you can just treat it as a server external package and then put the package name. So I guess when it evaluates your code and it does the import or the require statement, it'll just load it from your node modules folder instead of it bundling it all together. I guess sometimes some packages are not built properly, and so it's like very hard to run the bundler over the dependency graph. That's my only reasoning as to why this would be used. I don't know if I used this before. I'm guessing this used to be experimental and now it's stable, so probably not that big of news. ESLint 9 support. So it looks like they're supporting ESLint 9 now because I guess ESLint 8 is end of life October 5th. Okay, so it's already dead. Some information about that. It's not really that important. Development and build improvements. All right, so server components, hot module reloading. I guess how it works now is that like when you save a file, your server components will be re-executed, which means that it does another fetch for you. And then you will get charged if that's like a third-party service that is pay per use. You'll get charged for that. And it looks like the change is that now they are going to basically reuse the fetch responses from previous renders. So maybe this is another like foot gun where there's caching stuff locally when you wouldn't think it would be cached. So I guess keep an eye out for any strange behaviors around this. And if you're a good engineer, go and click on this link and read more about it. But I'm not, so let's just go here. Faster static generation for the app router. Okay, they made stuff faster. That's cool. I'm gonna skip over this. And I am burned out from reading all this. So they did a bunch of improvements. And then I guess we should give a shout out to all the contributors here who have been, making Next.js better and helping build up the Vercel empire. So if you guys like this little video, give me a thumbs up, comment, subscribe. Overall, not too many new features, but I think Next.js is just becoming more stable. So the hype is kind of dying down a little bit, and that's good. That means that we have something that seems like it's good, it's stable, and we don't have to worry about learning a bunch of new stuff every single time a new version comes out. All right, that's it. Have a good day. Happy coding.